We've been fighting the war on drugs since the 60s, and guess what? Trillions of dollars later, we are losing. Now the Justice Department has a proposal that would help fix one of the war's many failed policies. Attorney General Eric Holder is backing an early release program for some drug offenders. It would retroactively amend sentencing disparities between crack cocaine offenders and powder cocaine offenders. Those dealing or using powder cocaine are often white and affluent, while the overwhelming majority of those convicted for crack offenses happen to be African American. Harsh punishment began in the mid-'80s when crack cocaine plagued the streets of our big cities. Low-level crack dealers ended up serving sentences intended for high-power traffickers. And while Congress changed the sentencing law last year, it did not address the situation of thousands of prisoners still serving lengthy and often unjust sentences under the old system. Now I joined others in lobbying the Attorney General to move forward with this proposal. I think it's long overdue. Joining me now is Dr. James Peterson, Director of Africana Studies and Associate Professor of English at Lehigh University. Welcome.
Good evening. Thank you for having me, Reverend Al.
Thank you for coming. You know, Republicans are pushing back at this proposal. Congressman Lamar Smith says it sends a message that Congress doesn't take drug crime seriously. Why is that wrong, Professor?
It's wrong for a number of reasons. One, doesn't take into account the history of the ways in which these kind of policies have impacted disproportionately poor communities and communities of people of color. I mean, this is an important effort on the part of the Justice Department to really bring some justice to communities that are in need. And if you just think about it this way, for a long time, this disparity in crack cocaine versus powder cocaine sentencing has only affected one segment of the American population. And so we need justice for that segment of the population. And honestly, this will come to us in the form of this retroactive early release effort on the part of Attorney General Holder.
Professor Peterson, when you look at the disparities in sentencing drug offenders, hasn't this kind of injustice undermined the legitimacy of our criminal justice system?
Listen, of course it has. And listen, if you look at the rise of the prison industrial complex, the aggressiveness of our criminal justice system, the ways in which it's discriminatory against poor folk and people of color, you know, this is one of the outcomes of it, that we have a disproportionate amount of nonviolent substance abusers in prison. And the bottom line is, we know that even before this global committee or global commission, we knew that we needed to emphasize education and harm reduction over penalization and these kind of souped up penal codes that put people in jail for a long time. We cannot continue to put nonviolent substance abusers in jail and continue to privatize the prison system and think that that's actually a war on drugs. That's actually a war on poor folk who have substance abuse problems.
All right, but if lengthy prison sentences is not the answer, then how should we address drug crimes in the country?
There's a number of different ways to address it. Again, we need to emphasize education. What I'm referring to as harm reduction are things like needle exchange programs, educational programs, different efforts that try to be more proactive about substance abuse in the community. Now, obviously, what's going to have to be on the table eventually is some form of decriminalization, not legalization, but decriminalization for select substances. And then that will also help for us to sort of address the ways in which the cartels control and meet the demands of illegal or controlled substances, and the ways in which the police force and the criminal justice system is completely overwhelmed. The court system is overwhelmed, and the policing forces are overwhelmed with all these different sort of drug cases. So we have to do some things that are dynamic and actually thinking a little bit outside the box. And again, Attorney General Holder here is already doing that with this idea to try to address a problem that's been harming our communities for a long time.
You know, a new report from a global commission recommends an end to the war on drugs. Why do Republicans want to keep fighting it? Does it help their push to privatize our prison system?
Well, again, if people who are unfamiliar with the prison industrial complex, you know, since the mid-'70s, the United States has become one of the most aggressive countries in the world when it comes to incarcerating its own people. And there's a whole system that underlies that. So the criminal justice system in some ways leans on this aggressive policing and incarceration of non-violent substance abusers. And so we've increased our prison population exponentially, and we're putting criminals into a prison, we're putting substance abusers into into a prison, and when they come out, they're sometimes worse off, and sometimes they're committing worse crimes. So our recidivism rate is at 2/3. We continue to sort of have this draconian incarceration policies, and the bottom line is these things are not working. So what happens is that the Republicans understand that law and order, for whatever reasons, historically has had a lot of cachet in the political discourse. But what's good about the Global Commission is that we're actually now hopefully going to have some traction for things that we've known for a very, very long time, which is that aggressive incarceration does not reduce crime.
And I think that that's important. You're not saying that we should excuse criminal behavior, but we ought to deal with it in a way that is remedied and in a way that is fair and equal.
Absolutely. Listen, why don't we focus more on rehabilitation versus penalization, right? We are imprisoning and penalizing non-violent substance abusers. They're going into the system, and some of them, unfortunately, are coming out as hardened criminals. So we're actually training some folk to become criminals in the criminal justice system. So we've got to really start thinking outside of the box. Aggressive incarceration does not reduce crime. In fact, in the state of New York, as you already know this, Reverend, now, as we've tried to address some of these issues a little bit outside the box, we've actually reduced crime in the state of New York by not aggressively incarcerating folk. The bottom line is you cannot put non-violent substance abusers in prisons with hardened criminals. We've got to focus more on rehabilitation, education, and harm reduction when it comes to substance abuse.
Dr. James Peterson, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me, Reverend Al.